You need to understand that acceptance is not a sign of weakness. It is the most courageous act of love you can offer, and it is something that many people never truly grasp, because society tells us that holding on, fighting, pleading, and convincing is proof of care, but the truth is far more profound, far more intimate, far more transformative than the desperate clinging to someone who cannot stay. And you need to understand that when you honor the goodbye, when you let them leave without resentment, without anger, without trying to rewrite their choice, you are doing something that shakes the very foundation of their usual patterns. You are doing something that forces them to see the depth of your integrity, the fullness of your heart. And you need to understand that this act of emotional sovereignty, this act of stepping fully into yourself, is often the catalyst for awakening something in them that they have suppressed, ignored, or denied for years. You need to understand that avoidants live in constant tension between fear and desire, between longing and retreat. And when someone like you accepts their goodbye, when you stop giving them the familiar safety net of your presence, something shifts inside them. Something awakens that cannot be ignored, and you need to understand that it is not the absence itself that creates this awakening. It is the way you embody that absence with grace, the way you show up for yourself, the way you refuse to negotiate your worth or compromise your emotional boundaries, the way you communicate through your calm, through your self-respect. That love is not about manipulation, control, or persuasion, but about showing up fully as yourself and allowing them to confront the truth of what they feel when they are no longer able to rely on your presence to soothe their fear. You need to understand that accepting the goodbye is not about suppressing pain. It is about honoring it. It is about acknowledging that your heart will ache, that you will feel the void, that memories will replay in endless loops, and yet, even in the ache, there is power, because you are living authentically. You are refusing to shrink yourself. You are refusing to diminish your worth to fit the comfort of someone else. And you need to understand that this authenticity is magnetic in a way that avoidance cannot resist, that it speaks to the part of them that has been longing for connection, longing for someone who does not chase them, who does not beg, who does not attempt to fix them. And you need to understand that by embracing your own life, your own joy, your own completeness, you are offering them the rare chance to finally meet you as you are, whole, radiant, and uncompromised. And it is often in this moment, in the presence of your wholeness, that they begin to recognize the love that has always existed, the love they never allowed themselves to fully see. You need to understand that your love does not need to be conditional to be meaningful, that it does not need to bend to fear to be valid, that it does not need to tolerate less than you deserve to be transformative. And you need to understand that when you accept the goodbye, when you honor your own heart, when you step back with dignity, you are sending a message that cannot be misinterpreted, that you are worthy of being loved fully, freely, without compromise, without excuses. And it is this very message that often forces the avoidant to confront their own fear, their own avoidance, their own inability to meet someone where they have always been. And you need to understand that confronting this truth is painful for them. It is unfamiliar. It challenges their patterns, and yet it awakens a love that was always there, a love that had been buried under layers of self-protection. And you need to understand that your acceptance is the mirror in which they finally see what they cannot have automatically, what they cannot demand, what they cannot take for granted. And in seeing this, they begin to recognize the depth, the authenticity, the irreplaceable value of the person they almost lost forever. You need to understand that accepting the goodbye requires patience, emotional resilience, and unwavering self-respect. And you need to understand that it is not a passive act. It is an active, conscious, intentional choice to love yourself, to honor your boundaries, and to allow life to flow naturally without interference. And you need to understand that this act often has ripple effects beyond what you can see, because avoidants are conditioned to respond to pursuit, to manipulation, to the familiar dance of distance and return. And when you break that cycle by stepping into acceptance, by refusing to chase, by refusing to plead, by refusing to compromise, you are creating a space where they must confront what they feel when you are no longer at their disposal. proposal. And you need to understand that this confrontation is the moment when transformation begins, the moment when what they feel becomes undeniable, unavoidable, and real. You need to understand that this is not about revenge. This is not about teaching a lesson. This is not about proving them wrong. You need to understand that it is about living fully, loving fully, and honoring the truth of your heart. And you need to understand that this truth is magnetic, irresistible, and deeply moving for someone who has been conditioned to avoid vulnerability, to hide from connection, to flee from intimacy, because for the first time, they are faced with someone whose love cannot be controlled, cannot be taken for granted, cannot be negotiated, cannot be manipulated. And you need to understand that in this encounter with authenticity, in this recognition of worth, in this reflection of freedom, they often experience a love so profound, so transformative, so undeniable that they cannot ignore it, they cannot resist it, they cannot dismiss it. And you need to understand that this is the hidden power, the quiet miracle, the emotional awakening that comes from accepting the avoidance goodbye fully, courageously, without compromise, and with all the dignity and grace your heart can summon. You need to understand that by choosing yourself, by loving yourself enough to let go, by honoring your heart, you are creating a space in which love can finally breathe, in which connection can finally flourish, in which the avoidant can finally meet you fully. And you need to understand that this is the essence of emotional mastery, the essence of transformative love, the essence of being the person who does not chase, who does not manipulate, who does not compromise, who does not shrink. And you need to understand that it is often in this very act, in this very choice, that the avoidant finally recognizes the person they have always needed, the love they have always feared, and the heart that has always been capable of giving them what they never knew they deserved. And you need to understand that this recognition, this awakening, this deep, undeniable love is born from your courage to accept the goodbye fully. You need to understand that this is not just a lesson for them. It is a lesson for you. It is a lesson about the power of emotional sovereignty, about the strength of authentic love, about the beauty of honoring your own heart while still caring for someone else. And you need to understand that when you stand in this truth, when you embody this love, when you accept without fear, without resentment, without compromise, the avoidant often experiences the depth of what they almost lost, the reality of the love they cannot take for granted, the awakening of a love they never thought they deserved. And you need to understand that in this, both hearts are transformed, both lives are touched, and both souls are forever changed. You need to understand that when someone with avoidant tendencies distances themselves, when they retreat into the comfort of absence, it is not always a reflection of your worth. It is often a reflection of their own inability to process vulnerability. And you need to understand that their withdrawal is a language of fear disguised as freedom. It is a pattern of self-protection that has been reinforced over time. And it is not personal, even though it feels intensely personal, even though it hits the softest, most tender parts of your heart, even though you replay every conversation, every gesture, every smile, trying to find a clue, trying to make sense of the distance, trying to rewrite what is fundamentally their choice. And you need to understand that the first step toward real healing is recognizing that their behavior is about them, not about you, even when the pain is yours to feel, even when the absence leaves a hollow ache in your chest. And you need to understand that feeling that ache, naming it, honoring it, is part of reclaiming your power, is part of stepping into emotional sovereignty, is part of learning that love is not a contract to be fulfilled by someone else. It is an experience you carry fully, wholly, without depending on the compliance of another to validate it. You need to understand that the act of letting go, the conscious decision to step back while still holding love in your heart, is an extraordinary demonstration of strength. It is a quiet revolution within yourself. It is a declaration that you will not chase, you will not bargain, you will not shrink, you will not plead. And you need to understand that this is terrifying for someone who is used to distance, because they are accustomed to a dance of fear and pursuit, of closeness and retreat, of uncertainty and control. And when you break the cycle, when you step fully into your own life, when you create space that cannot be filled by their avoidance, something shifts within them. Something awakens that has long been dormant, something they cannot fully articulate. And you need to understand that this shift is often a spark of recognition, a flash of clarity, a sudden understanding of the depth, the consistency, the authenticity of the love they have always had before them, but never fully acknowledged because they could not face it without running. You need to understand that boundaries are not walls, they are bridges to clarity. They are beacons that illuminate what is possible and what is not. They are demonstrations of self-respect and self-love, and you need to understand that when you enforce these boundaries with compassion, when you honor your need for space while still holding care in your heart, when you choose to prioritize your own emotional health without resentment, without anger, without bitterness, it is profoundly disarming to someone who has conditioned themselves to believe that love is something to manipulate, control, or evade. And you need to understand that this disarming, this quiet, steady, unwavering presence in your own life, this consistency in your integrity, often triggers a deep, unconscious response, a recognition that they cannot have you on their terms. They cannot shape you. They cannot use your presence to soothe their fears. And you need to understand that in this recognition, the door to genuine, awakened love begins to open. A love that is no longer about avoidance, a love that is no longer about control, a love that finally aligns with truth. You need to understand that love is not about enforcing change. It is not about fixing someone. It is not about correcting patterns that have been ingrained over years. It is not about sacrificing your own heart in the process of trying to win them over. And you need to understand that your role is not to save. It is not to chase. It is not to negotiate your worth. It is to show up authentically, fully, courageously, and to allow the natural consequences of their choices to unfold. And you need to understand that this is both terrifying and liberating because it means you are vulnerable, exposed, and yet fully empowered, because you are no longer living in the shadow of their approval, their attention, their presence. You are living fully in your own light, and you need to understand that living in your own light is magnetic, irresistible, and profoundly moving for someone who has avoided the depth of feeling for so long. You need to understand that stepping back, allowing absence to exist, honoring the space between you, is not a withdrawal of love. It is a demonstration of it. It is a measure of your courage, your patience, your emotional clarity, and you need to understand that in this absence, the avoidant begins to feel the weight of their choices, the reality of what they cannot have, the truth of what they took for granted, and you need to understand that this feeling is often more impactful than any words, more transformative than any pleading, more revealing than any confrontation, because it is the silent mirror of your strength, of your dignity, of your unwavering presence in your own life. You need to understand that the act of refusing to chase, the act of stepping fully into your own world, the act of allowing them to live with the consequences of their avoidance is not about punishment. It is not about revenge. It is not about teaching a lesson. It is about love, true love, authentic love, love that does not compromise, love that does not manipulate, love that does not bend to fear. And you need to understand that this kind of love, unwavering, consistent, and authentic, is the kind that often awakens someone who has never known how to stay, the kind that forces them to confront the truth of what they feel when they realize that your presence is not theirs to command. And you need to understand that confronting this truth, feeling this loss, facing the reflection of your wholeness, is a moment of transformation for them, a moment of awakening to the depth of a love they cannot take for granted. And you need to understand that this is the paradox of loving an avoidant. By stepping back, by accepting, by honoring your own heart fully, you create the conditions in which they can finally see, finally feel, finally recognize the love that has always been there but has been obscured by fear and avoidance. You need to understand that this process is not instantaneous. It requires patience. It requires faith. It requires emotional endurance. And you need to understand that even when it feels like they have forgotten, even when it feels like the distance is permanent, even when the silence stretches, you are still planting seeds. You are still creating ripples. You are still shaping a space in which authentic recognition and love can emerge. And you need to understand that their eventual realization is not a reflection of your manipulation. It is a reflection of the integrity with which you have held yourself, the courage with which you have loved without compromise, and the unwavering dignity with which you have honored both your heart and theirs. You need to understand that allowing them to live with their choices, allowing them to confront the reality of your absence, is the ultimate demonstration of love. It is the ultimate awakening. It is the ultimate mirror in which they finally see the depth of what has always been present. And you need to understand that this is not about forcing them to love you. It is about showing them that love cannot be commanded. It cannot be bargained for. It cannot be coerced. It can only be experienced fully and recognized when it meets integrity, when it meets authenticity, when it meets a heart that refuses to shrink, compromise, or chase. And you need to understand that in this, transformation happens, awakening happens, and finally, after the distance, after the absence, after the space, they begin to feel the love they never allowed themselves to feel before. And it is often at this moment, in the presence of your unwavering authenticity, that they truly begin to love you. You need to understand that love is not about holding on desperately. It is not about clinging to someone who chooses distance. It is not about convincing someone to stay when their heart is not ready. And you need to understand that this is one of the hardest truths for anyone who loves deeply to accept, because when we care, when we feel, when our hearts are open, we naturally want to fix, to persuade, to mend, to plead, to keep. And you need to understand that letting go is not the absence of love. It is an expression of it in its purest, most courageous form. It is a declaration that your love does not come with strings attached, that it does not demand control, that it does not require compliance. And you need to understand that when someone with avoidant tendencies faces this kind of love, something profound begins to shift within them, because they are not used to being met with patience, with clarity, with self-respect, with unwavering authenticity. And you need to understand that they have spent so long running, so long avoiding, so long testing, so long building walls around their hearts that they forgot what it feels like to be fully seen. And when you step back, when you stop chasing, when you honor yourself fully, they are confronted with a reflection of your worth, a reflection of your consistency, a reflection of a love they cannot manipulate or control. You need to understand that absence is not emptiness. It is a mirror, it is a canvas on which the avoidant begins to project the truth of what they feel. It is a space in which they can no longer distract themselves with games, with avoidance, with testing, with misdirection. And you need to understand that this space is necessary not to punish, not to hurt, not to prove a point, but to allow them to confront the reality of what they are missing, to allow them to see the full weight of their decisions, to allow them to feel the loss that comes from taking something genuine for granted. And you need to understand that this loss is often the spark that awakens something dormant, that makes them realize that love is not something to evade, that it is not something to play with, that it is not something to treat casually, that it is not something that can be experienced in fragments or half measures. It requires presence. It requires vulnerability. It requires courage. And you need to understand that by accepting the goodbye, by holding your heart with integrity, by refusing to chase, you are creating the conditions for this awakening to occur. You need to understand that letting someone live with their choices is one of the most difficult forms of love because it asks you to surrender control over the outcome. It asks you to accept uncertainty. It asks you to step into a space where your heart feels exposed and raw, and you need to understand that this exposure is not weakness. It is power. It is clarity. It is a demonstration that your love is not transactional. It is not contingent upon the approval or engagement of another. It is authentic, it is steadfast, it is unwavering, and you need to understand that this steadfastness is a force that is difficult for someone who is avoidant to ignore because they are accustomed to chasing, to testing, to creating instability to protect themselves. And when they encounter someone who does not bend, does not chase, does not negotiate their worth, they are forced to face the truth of what they feel. And you need to understand that this confrontation is transformative because it is not about coercion. It is about revelation. It is about a mirror that reflects a love they cannot control, a love they cannot evade, a love that is fully alive and fully present even in absence. You need to understand that boundaries are not a withdrawal from love. They are the clearest form of respect for both yourself and the other person. They are a declaration of what is acceptable and what is not. They are a map of emotional integrity, and you need to understand that when you maintain these boundaries with compassion and clarity, when you refuse to compromise your dignity for the sake of someone else's comfort, it creates a profound impact because it is unexpected, it is disarming, it is authentic, it is real, and you need to understand that avoidants are used to people bending, chasing, negotiating, pleading, adjusting, accommodating, shrinking. And when none of these patterns work, when your love does not come with the familiar dance of pursuit and retreat, they are forced to feel the consequences of their avoidance, and you need to understand that this feeling is often more potent than any confrontation, more transformative than any ultimatum, more enlightening than any argument because it bypasses the mind and speaks directly to the heart, to the parts of them that have been hiding, running, and shielding for so long. You need to understand that patience is part of this process. Patience for yourself, patience for them, patience for the unfolding of life. And you need to understand that this patience is not passive, it is active, it is present, it is intentional, it is love in motion. And you need to understand that in the waiting, in the absence, in the acceptance, you are demonstrating a level of emotional maturity and strength that is rare and magnetic, that is grounding and stabilizing, that cannot be feigned or ignored. And you need to understand that this demonstration often awakens an unexpected depth of feeling in the avoidant, a realization that what they were running from is not a threat but a gift, that what they took for granted is the truest form of love they have ever encountered. And you need to understand that this realization can be life-changing for them. It can rewire their understanding of intimacy, of vulnerability, of connection, of trust, of love itself. You need to understand that this process is not about controlling outcomes. It is about holding your own heart fully. It is about honoring your own needs. It is about stepping into your own light. It is about living authentically. And you need to understand that when you do this, when you step fully into yourself, when you do not shrink, when you do not chase, when you do not bargain, you are creating a presence so powerful, so undeniable, so real, that it cannot help but awaken recognition in someone who has been avoidant, someone who has been distant, someone who has been testing and retreating, someone who has been hiding behind walls and fears. And you need to understand that this recognition is the seed of genuine love, because they are no longer seeing someone they can evade or manipulate. They are seeing the full integrity of your heart, the unwavering reality of your love, the unshakable power of your presence. You need to understand that love in this context is paradoxical. It requires stepping back to move forward. It requires holding firm to allow space for growth. It requires accepting absence to make room for recognition, and you need to understand that when someone finally encounters this, when they live with the consequences of their avoidance, when they are faced with a love that cannot be commanded, a love that cannot be bent, a love that cannot be chased, they often begin to love you in a way they never could before. Not because you demanded it, not because you manipulated it, not because you forced it, but because your integrity, your presence, your patience, your courage, and your unwavering self-respect made them see the value of what they almost lost and awakened a depth of feeling that had been buried beneath fear, avoidance, and self-protection for far too long.